Push your buttons.
Okay, yeah, we're good.
5:39 and we are live.
Okay, excellent. Welcome everyone to the April 26th meeting of the Economic Development Committee. Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Councilmember Carson, Councilmember LaFarge,
Here.
Councilmember Fountain, please.
Present. There's these out. Okay, welcome. Let's see. Oh, this is just one of these. I'm gonna give this to you. Okay. Okay, let me just get back to my agenda. So Chair Carson is out, so I'm gonna chair the meeting. It's gonna be a lively one. Did you get a chance to look at the minutes?
Yes,
Okay, great. No objections?
no objections.
Perfect. So moving on to our topics. Today we're gonna talk about 3 things as long as we have time. First, we're gonna try to nail down our mission statement. What, did I miss something? Do we need to vote on it?
No.
Okay. We're gonna try to nail down our mission statement. This is our 3rd or 4th meeting, and it would be great if we had a clear vision for the future. So Councilmember Falco has provided us with with a printout of some statements that have been tossed around. What I'd like to do is read through them, maybe try to find a way to come up with something that is unified that we can bring to our next meeting to vote on as a group to, ratify. Okay, so we have here, do you want to read? I'm probably going to talk a lot.
Sure.
Okay, great.
So these were just 2 statements, one that Katie put out and then one that I kind of added to, and I think Len had kind of combined them or added some notes, but I'm not sure where those are. They're somewhere in cyberspace. So we have here as a first statement, to develop recommendations for the council with the goal of fostering a favorable business climate, attracting new businesses and expanding existing businesses, creating jobs and broadening our tax base. And then the second one is to provide recommendations to the Common Council and City Administration, I don't know if that's appropriate, for creating economic prosperity in the city of Oneonta by developing, supporting, and nurturing relationships with current businesses and stakeholders, creating initiatives and tactics to attract new businesses and citizens, and fostering growth within our community by enabling these ventures to thrive. So one's very straightforward. I think mine's a little more like woo-y because,
Yeah, it has more to it for sure. And so with mine, I was just trying to be sort of as broad as possible while being specific about where we're going, but not really how we're getting there. I like yours a lot. I think the only word that gives me weird vibes is tactics.
Sure.
But we could absolutely very easily find a synonym for that. Strategies, I heard from the gallery, is great. And the only thing that I would really want to make sure that we add is, because I think that it's critical to our unique position as a city, is broadening our tax base. I really think we need to keep that in mind as a goal. So if we said to provide recommendations to the Common Council and City Administration for creating economic prosperity by developing, supporting, and nurturing relationships.
I mean, maybe I feel like it's wordy, so it could be cut down.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe instead, I think the only thing with yours is that I just kind of wanted to include, I wanted somewhere, I mean, so I guess there is expanding existing businesses. I just wanted to make sure that it's not just about getting a lot of new people here or just bringing all new things. It's also about cultivate, helping people that are here,
Yeah.
And they're already working hard to make Oneonta what it is.
Yeah, and again, that's where I was sort of trying to go with fostering a favorable business climate. But I see that, and I know as a local business owner, that's near and dear to you. And so I'm
Maybe instead of expanding existing businesses, like,
expanding and supporting.
well, what does that mean to expand the existing businesses?
To be able to make them more economically viable.
Yeah, so maybe, like, when I think of expanding, I think of like that they're gonna develop a franchise or something, you know?
Locations. And-
Yeah, so maybe like instead of expanding, like supporting, yeah, maybe it's as simple as that, supporting
Okay.
existing businesses, creating jobs and broadening our tax base. Yeah,
Okay. So do you want to go with the first one with that change?
I think so.
Okay.
I think so.
Okay, I know Len had a lot of like really specific, in his, he had included like a lot of really specific ways that he sort of wanted to go about that. I don't know for me that I would support putting that in our mission statement, but I think we could sort of honor that intent by saying something about, you know, exploring new ideas in order to.
Right. We could maybe have like, I don't know, as like something that is like maybe taken from this, like, or on in addition to it, maybe like some bullet points of like maybe some ways that we want to do it that are also still broad, but not just part of the like the overall mission statement. Because I agree, I think you want to keep it broad, so that way you have flexibility.
Yeah. Okay. So let's, I guess, then tentatively accept the first one with the change of supporting from expanding.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll just add a note that we want to try to, you know, add that intent in some way that does not get too specific in order to like limit us as to what we're going to be doing.
Yeah.
Okay, because then we can get sort of Len's input a
Because
little
I
bit.
feel like I've seen with the other committees, right, there's a mission statement and then there are kind of other like breakaway points. Are there?
I feel like we're asking you this question because I don't know the answer.
I must be. Okay.
Yeah,
So the other committees and commissions typically don't have mission statements. They have, when their legislation creates their board, committee, or commission, it then speaks to their intent. The only one that I know of that has an actual mission statement will be the Commission on Community Relations and Human Rights.
okay,
So you guys are in the beginning.
Great.
excellent. Okay, so we can sort of create our own mold here. Great.
Okay.
Okay, I'm cool with that. I
Me
just
too.
have a little bit of deja vu, but obviously this has never happened before, so here we are.
Okay,
Okay,
means the
excellent.
right things are happening.
Oh, good.
Okay, if you get deja vu.
I love it. Okay, great. So if you feel good about that, then we can just put that forward to our next agenda. We'll try to get a little bit of input from Len without him taking us on a totally different course. And it sounds like we have, are close to having a mission statement, which is great. We didn't have to spend a lot of time on it, so that's awesome. Do you feel complete with topic A?
Yes.
Excellent. Topic B. So this is, there was a call that we were invited to by our community development department as a council, and both Emily and I had expressed interest in being there, but we weren't able to attend. So if you would be so kind as to bring us up to speed on what you got from that call, so that we may know too.
Steven's gonna do it. I was on vacation Friday and I got on it about 15 minutes late, so Steven was on it the whole time.
So it was basically a presentation on upper floor housing, which specifically in the city of Oneonta, we've kind of already started that process through the DRI. So we're kind of a little ahead on that, but what really the kind of meat and potatoes of the call was really on historic tax credits. So the way that historic tax credits work basically is our entire Main Street is a National Register district. So all the buildings along Main Street are eligible for historic tax credits through National Park Service and then also through state tax credits. In total, those are about 50, you can get up to 50% of a project cost in the return in tax credits.
Wow.
Yeah, so let's say you have $100,000 of qualifying expenses, you could get 50,000 of it back. So basically, it's a very lucrative tax credit option if we were to. Wow. So the call was basically Elise Johnson Schmidt put the presentation on, and she's a historic preservation architect, and she runs a firm who does basically not only do they do architecture work, but they also do like planning work. They work with developers to put together grant funding and tax credit projects. They did Brazee's, they did Stevens Hardware. So with Chip Klugo. So two of our, I would say, two of our most successful downtown projects have been run through this firm. And she's kind of I mean, I would say she's an expert on basically historic tax credits and how to use them to, specifically for this presentation, fund. They had a bunch of case studies from various projects that they've worked on. Brazee's was one of them they actually used for this presentation. The importance of this is because we have projects like the Oneonta Hotel, you know, that could be $6 million in tax credits. We've got projects like the Oneonta Theater. We have a couple projects like the Working Kitchen, for example, even the building that Roots is in. There are many options available to downtown business owners and building owners if they were to utilize these tax credits to do improvements on their buildings. So the idea was we kind of wanted to kind of get that word out, and we've been pushing that because places like Buffalo, right now, Buffalo, the city of Buffalo, is basically leading the pack on these things. I mean, SHPO is like, we are seeing millions of dollars flowing through Buffalo in the form of historic tax credits.
They got a $50 million DRI, so that's part of the reason why they're so far ahead of everybody else in the state.
Right.
Wow.
So like what we're kind of looking at is coming up with ways to better educate the public about the use of those credits, because we have buildings that could, you know, you can leverage a lot of money with those tax credits. The only thing that it's not upfront money, so you have to actually invest the money and then you get it back. So one of the things I would say is like this, it's not really a funding stream, it's a for the next project stream. But in our case, a $200,000 project maybe will be the only project you do, and it's still $100,000 of money back in your pocket after it's done. So that's kind of the importance of these credits, and that's kind of what that entire presentation was about.
Yeah, she also went through the importance, I think she illustrated through her case studies, the importance of the developers having a team.
Right.
And a municipality is a partner, a team member, but we aren't leading the development because, you know, the owner of the project has to lead that. But some of these case studies that she showed, like if she had gone through the Stevens building, for instance, because that's the most recent one we did, that not only had a very experienced developer and a development team with a consultant, Johnson Schmidt architects, but they also got grant money that the city applied for. We applied for a Restore New York grant, got the project $750,000. And they themselves applied for an ESD grant and got $90,000, I believe it was, which is 20% of their project costs they could get through that grant. And I'm not sure what the rest of their funding is, and because I don't remember the total project cost on that one, but he had the majority of that project funded because he had a team that knew how to do this. So he had the city on his team, he had his developer, his consultant on the team, and they put together this funding package. And she showed a number of case studies where, you know, the projects were multi-million-dollar projects, so they were a combination of state grants, loans, and private financing as well through the developers. So it's a whole package, but it's really important to have that team put together. It was pretty interesting. They're not putting the recording out, but they are putting out the PDF of her presentation. And I've asked her for it, I just haven't gotten it yet. So when I get it, I'll pass it along.
Another thing to think about is we know that Otsego 2000, is that? Yeah. they're working to redistrict some of our cities. So we know that there'll be some expansion of the historic districts and perhaps the creation of new historic districts. The biggest tax credits are for income producing properties, but residential units that come in they can get up to a 20% tax credit. So what we'll see there is, I mean, even places like Walnut right now, Walnut is a National Register district that's eligible for tax credits. Income producing properties on Walnut are also up to that 50% mark.
Wow.
So we know that if these districts expand, it's something that even residents could take advantage of on, it can be like re-siding a house, repairing porches, like replacing windows, like stuff like that is eligible for tax credits.
Cool. So you guys like alluded to it a couple times, and I guess I just wanna expand the conversation on, like, so the city is not the one to do this on the behalf of developers or eligible homeowners, but like, how do we, I guess the question I wanna ask is like, how do we facilitate that in a way that, to your point, gets the word out more, that people
So,
are able to.
Otsego 2000 will assist and like with homeowners for tax credits. SHPO is willing to do presentations on it. We've talked to the people at SHPO. They do basically public education programming.
Okay.
Housing Commission.
The Housing Commission could
The
do it,
Housing Commission could lead an education component.
right?
Pretty cool.
Further, like a project that I've kind of been trying to pitch for years is the idea of the certified local government program.
Okay.
That actually creates like a board that oversees some of this process. So in a lot of communities that are CLGs like that certified local government board is the one that's doing the historic preservation outreach. They're doing the public education part of it. They're doing the review processes for it. And they often will work with SHPO to help facilitate some of this stuff. Yeah, so typically a developer would have like an Elise Johnson Schmidt who like they specialize in that and they take them through from beginning to end.
Right. So, Emily, do you have any questions on that?
Not so far.
Okay, I wanted to ask more about the certified local government thing, because I think I ran across that when I was looking into
Main Street.
Main Street America. So what does that entail? Like, how do we?
Certified local government basically makes like a codified historic preservation ordinance. So you basically are creating regulation as to what people can do with properties that are in local historic districts. That certified local government program basically makes us eligible to apply for additional like grant funding through Preservation League and through National Park Service.
Mhm.
But it adds, additional kind of regulatory mechanisms that relate to local historic districts. The certified local government board can designate historic districts. So a lot of times what communities do is they designate locally already existing national register districts.
Okay.
So it's kind of like a zoning mechanism. The most recent MU1 code update basically codified through zoning a lot of the stuff that the CLG process does. It was just codified through our zoning code, which in a way we have the regulation now, but we don't have the benefits of being a certified local government.
That makes sense.
Most of our surrounding communities, Cooperstown is a certified local government, Schenectady is a certified local government, Cobleskill is a certified local government.
Really?
Yeah, I know. Albany is certified local
Hey,
government.
I'm from there.
Oh.
No, what's so a lot of our surrounding communities are certified local governments. But what you hear with the certified local government, like in Cooperstown, like you can't put vinyl siding on, you can't paint your house purple. That's a lot of the stuff that you get with these, because it adds another layer of restriction on property. There's a lot of ways you can do it. Some certified local government ordinances only impact front facades, the front of the house, what you can see from the road.
Gotcha.
Doesn't affect backyards, side yards. SHPO says you should not write in restrictions on like paint colors because they're like, it's not, they don't want you to do that. So some of that like myth around the historic preservation part of it is kind of myth. But it does have regulation. But yeah, it's something that's available.
Gotcha. And so that would be something where we would draft that like through the legislative committee.
That regulatory framework has to be approved by SHPO
Okay.
because it has to go to the National Park Service, and the National Park Service is the one that actually is the certifying agency.
Gotcha.
We have a drafted ordinance that went through SHPO that just has never gone further because it has to be reviewed and approved by our local legislative body.
Gotcha.
I
mean,
On a side note with that,
okay.
Elise Johnson-Smith, she was part of the Main Street America program, and she knows a lot about Main Street, New York. So she might be someone we would want to talk to in regard to that program that you had brought up that we kind of talked about before, and like some of the other programs that exist in New York that are similar to it.
Okay.
She's one of the original.
She's one of the original
members
people.
of Main Street, which
Cool.
there's so
Sounds
many
cool.
organizations she was telling us about, but she's one of the original board members from the 70s and then again in the 90s on the New York Main Street.
So she knows a lot of stuff. She knows a lot of stuff about
history.
preservation
Yeah.
movements, and she can tell you all like the incestuous weird details that you won't find by reading about it. So
I mean, to me, it sounds like, you know, obviously, like, we're sort of working on ways to improve, but, you know, what I'm thinking about not just Main Street, but like our housing stock as well, and that being the like bigger picture, sort of a huge obstacle to growth in our community. And it sounds like, you know, that would be an interesting way to support a direction, like a unified sort of direction for our neighborhoods. So, I mean, I would be happy to introduce that if we have something that's approved by SHPO.
the other thing to think about is our comprehensive plan includes, one of our comprehensive plan goals is to become a CLG. I mean, it's in our comprehensive plan update from 2019.
Okay.
Our comprehensive plan also includes the expansion of our historic districts. Like, this isn't outside of what we've already determined through our comprehensive planning documents as to like a direction we would like to go.
Right.
And I have a
Sounds like
whole
it's
pile of other theories and
Stalls, you know.
well, you're gonna be creating regulatory parts.
Yeah,
So
well, that's what we're here for, right?
Yep.
Okay.
you just have to, I think where I'm going with that is you will be creating like an additional level of basically like zoning almost
Mhm.
that would require review. It requires a board.
Mhm.
It's like a zoning board of appeals basically,
Yeah,
except specifically for historic buildings.
that was gonna be sort of my follow-up question is like, you know, say, okay, so I asked about like bringing it to the legislative committee, bringing it to council, what would need to happen? And then, you know, say we were to approve this, like what is the structure? So we would have to put together a new board
Yep.
for this. Okay,
Yeah, it can't be done by an existing board. It has to be a standalone. There's regulation about who can be on it. And it does add another, like I said, if you are in a historic district and you're like, I want to replace all the windows in my house,
yeah, they have to be like of a certain caliber.
there would be basically a review process for that.
Right.
Like changing opening sizes, changing locations of openings. I mean, there's a whole kind of framework that exists in that you
Yeah.
would then have to have the political will to see through. So, I mean, like, if you look at places like Schenectady,
Mhm.
they have a very aggressive certified local government. And they're pretty. So yeah, so it's one of those things that could be helpful, but it is, you know, there's some political.
It's not gonna be easy. Yeah,
Anytime you tell people
Right.
they can do with their property, it's not easy.
Yeah, I wonder, so I was looking at, 'cause in my preparation for like the arts conversation, I was trying to look at like comparable cities, public arts programs. And of course, like we love Ithaca, I'm gonna say that on YouTube, they're great and they're doing a really great job. And I feel like every time you wanna do something, you're like, what's Ithaca doing? But, so I went to their, and I was reading their code and they had something, the reason why I'm thinking of this is because you had mentioned the public facing thing, and I read that in their code, so I wonder if they, I wouldn't be surprised, right, if they're a CLG.
They're CLG. They're
Yeah,
certified
so I wonder if
local.
that is the part of their code that I was reading.
Yeah, so a lot of, like, one of the ways to kind of offset some of that regulatory is saying like properties facing the right of way are regulated, but like the rear and sides or there's ways to do it that are less restrictful.
Yeah,
But like I always jokingly say, like, we have more code about where you can store a garbage can than we do about tearing down your house. So like you can tear down a house on Walnut with site plan review. But if you store your garbage can in the median, we can ticket you.
Yeah.
So it's a really weird. We regulate really weird stuff and then we don't regulate some things at all. So
Yeah.
it's kind of weird.
I guess to bring it back to economic development, you know, getting out of that big picture, housing being really important, I think, to economic development. Doing that sounds like it would also have some benefits for Main Street and some of our historic commercial buildings. Judy shaking her head, yes, that's always great to see.
So what we've done with our downtown code is we've written in that section of the CLG ordinance into our zoning code.
Okay,
So right now, if you're downtown, the new downtown code says it's basically as restrictive as a CLG ordinance.
okay,
Because we want to say, in our comp plan, it says, we want to protect the historic integrity of our Main Street. So that's exactly what our new zoning code does.
right,
What's written into our zoning code right now, if you were to apply for historic tax credits, if you're just following our zoning code, you're more than likely qualifying. Because the zoning code is specifically written to meet the standards by it's basically there's a thing called the standards, the Secretary of Interior standards for the renovation, alteration, et cetera, of historic properties. So our zoning code has adopted those basically as this is the zoning code. So if you're applying to SHPO, you're already meeting those standards just by following the zoning code.
yeah,
So what makes the historic tax credits easy downtown is basically to meet the zoning code, you're meeting the Secretary of the Interior standards.
gotcha,
So you're essentially going to qualify just because you're following our zoning code.
right,
So we already have that written into the downtown code. But as we expand these historic districts, in theory, you would want to kind of expand that regulatory mechanism. And that's what the CLG is supposed to do, is be that regulatory mechanism.
cool.
I mean, in the meantime, though, could we also just continue to adopt those things into the zoning code as these historic districts are created?
Yeah, so I mean, what you would be
But
doing
it's
is
better to set up an actual,
what you're doing there is you're all stick and no carrot. So you're like, there's no benefit other than we're writing these things in and we're making the zoning code to make a more attractive place. But we're not getting the carrot of grant funding.
right?
Like, we're not getting the carrot of,
Mhm.
you know, we individuals can get those tax credits, but we're not getting that benefit. We're just all club, you know,
Right, as a city, we're not getting that grant funding that we could otherwise.
Yeah.
get. I see.
that is
Okay.
made to help
Mhm.
people that live in these historic districts. So you get the tax credit, but then it's just the city cooperating with regulatory mechanisms.
Does it have to be a district or can it be individual properties?
So it doesn't have to be a district. So like if you go to New York City, they have the landmark, whatever their committee's called. They're like the Papa Bears of CLGs kind of. They're like New York City is.
Judy makes the right
So New York City has a committee, a CLG board, and they go and they make districts. They can also do individual buildings, like landmark buildings. To typically what you want to do is historic districts are easy because a national register district has already been surveyed. So if it meets the national register standards, it's going to meet your local, like if you have to defend it in court, if you have to be like, why was this building determined to be historic? You can be like, well, duh, it's on the national register. Instead of, well, me and my neighbors wanted it to be historic because we didn't want our neighbor to like put vinyl siding up or something. So the mechanism is, if you have national register districts, they've already been surveyed, they already meet a theoretical standard. If you had to go to court and say, why is this being regulated under this CLG ordinance? Well, it's on the national register. It already meets that kind of national park level, federal level. This is why. So like Stuart Wilcox House would be an individual property that would fall under the CLG ordinance because we would obviously say this is locally important, just like it's nationally important. Our Main Street, it's already on the national register. So of course we would say this is a local historic district. Where it gets weird is if you start just making local districts that haven't been surveyed, that don't meet that kind of national park mechanism, then you kind of would have to start saying, well, why are we doing this? And what mechanism makes these buildings specifically historic?
Yeah, the board would have to come up with.
Yeah, because the board is the one that designates these districts. And what typically happens is these districts and places like us, New York City is a totally different animal. They are a totally different animal. In a place like Oneonta, what we would do is we would just be like, National Register District probably would be a local district. We probably don't want to get in the business of running around and finding individual buildings that we're going to say are historic, because you can do it, but it's weird. Because
Yeah,
you want that, like what we're doing right now with Otsego 2000 is they're doing historic surveys. They're going out, they're finding these buildings, they're saying this is why they meet.
yeah, they're sort of doing that work for
They're doing the
us.
footwork for us. Yeah. So like Elm Street would be a great example of a place that you could expand your historic district. And it probably will, but they're doing the survey for it. We wouldn't want to say, well, let's designate these as local historic districts, and then maybe we'll catch up later with the national park.
Cool.
Yeah, no, it's cool. I mean, I just like thinking about even like the home that you're working on and like there's all these like, you know, because in Oneonta, there are these like really cool, amazing old homes. And then like next to it is like a house that was built like in the 60s.
Yeah, they're kind of
You
spotted
know.
in.
So like,
I mean, I feel like the historical society could help with that.
Then they are. So Bob Brzezowski is working with Ellen Pope on that surveying process. Yeah, so like where my house is, there's a definitive cutoff between 1890s and then a later kind of suburban build that goes up like towards Hazel. So one of the comments on a house on Cedar Street is that this would be a great district because if you have this really interesting delineation between Victorian and later like Dutch colonial type, like 1920s. So yeah, like when you look at a district, you look at all kinds of things like that. It's not just all these houses match, so these are a historic district. They're looking for like trends and patterns.
I think even like over by Academy Street, I mean, it's a little hodgepodge in some areas, but there are like a lot of cool, like very, very old houses over here.
I mean, and then you get into weird stuff like even SUNY Oneonta. Like that, the structures on the campus of SUNY Oneonta are like a really great example of like mid-century modern architecture that are actually intact, like spaces and types of buildings that they're eligible to be on the National Register.
Cool.
Like St. Mary's Church is on the National Register,
Okay.
and it's a mid-mod, you know, just that kind of artsy, weird. So yeah, so it's not just old stuff. There's all kinds of stuff you can put on the net. Anything that's 50 years old could theoretically go on the National Register.
Wow.
Yeah, we're like eyeing down Wendy's that could be on the National Register. Like I know an Arby's where I grew up that could theoretically be on the National Register.
Cool. Yeah, that is cool. Thank you for the recap on the call and, yeah, good discussion on how we like facilitate, using some of that program.
And I mean, that might be something that we, I don't know, contact Elise to do. I mean, she could do a presentation on that. I mean, theoretically,
That would
on
be
like those
awesome.
different programs and, because that's what she did for that presentation, was just like an educational rundown of kind of how those credits work and how those programs work, and
Yeah, maybe we could come together with the housing commission. for
or
that.
SHPO could do it.
Yeah, that would be nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, some way to,
Elise can provide the big picture
Mhm.
of the whole project, where like SHPO would be fine tuned down on just the
The
national.
tax credits.
The tax credits, but with Elise's firm, they've worked the entire, the project from soup to nuts all the way through, and she can bring that to the table when she's talking, rather than just a little piece of it.
Okay,
With specific examples in Oneonta, like she could be like, this is how we did Stevens Hardware Building.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I mean, her firm is doing projects with developers in Ithaca, Rome, Utica, they're all over,
where's she located?
Corning.
Cool.
They've done a ton of stuff in Elmira, Olean.
Elmira, yep, they're rebuilding at Elmira, I forget what they're calling the initiative, but yeah, she's a good
Yes.
resource.
I went there last year and I saw that sort of in the
That's her
process. That's
developer she's working on.
cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that would be really great for this committee.
Would you like us to see if we can arrange that for the next?
Sure, yeah, that feels above my pay grade, but well, I'm here. Let's do it.
We want to do it in couple with the other.
I do, yeah, so I mean, potentially that could be something that's like, when she could do it, we could have a special meeting that combines the two boards. So that everyone could be there.
I mean, you could even just do like you said, like a special meeting, like to not take it from either board, just do like a
Yeah,
workshop or something.
yeah, that would be great. Yeah, thank you. Okay. Cool, all right, let's move on. We can have just like a short chat, maybe about arts funding. So with this, I mean, this feels sort of like I'm preaching to the choir a little bit here. But what I'd like to do is talk about so one of the I don't know, responsibilities that I feel as liaison to the Arts Commission is that they need funding in order to put public art in our community. And I think the best way for that to happen, to gain support and counsel, is like proof of concept, right? Is like talking about what the return on investment is. And so I did some research on some of the benefits of public art. Again, I feel like I'm probably preaching to the choir a little bit. Okay, but we can talk about it a little bit, and then what I'd like to do is I have some examples of legislation that supports arts funding that I'd like to get in front of the legislative committee, but we can kind of talk about those a little bit. So basically, in my travels, the best thing that I found is this this widget kind of on the AmericansForTheArts.org website, which is the Arts and Social Impact Explorer. So it's basically, that's sort of where I found, that is where I found these things. But basically it has broken out into like a pie chart, the impact of arts on infrastructure, on education, on social justice, and so on faith, on the economy. And so in our conversation, I just tried to pick the few that I thought were probably the most important. And then I basically just downloaded like the fact sheet on them. And so that's what you have in front of you. We're here obviously in arts and economic development. And so I just thought we could maybe talk about this a little bit, but I think that, some of the other facts that I found that are pretty convincing, are that, and they're really pretty universal and in that way sort of undeniable, that, and a lot of these are from americansforthearts.org, but basically, people who visit a community in order to attend an art-related event spend $31.47 per person per event on extras. So not on the event itself, they spend an additional $32 per person on either food, lodging, or parking. It's the fourth largest driver of trip planning decisions, and approximately 35% of travelers extend their trip if there's arts in the community that they're visiting. A UPenn study found that communities that have public art have higher civic engagement, higher child welfare, and lower poverty rates. So, yeah, I don't know. I don't love to do that much talking, but I do have these handouts. I don't know if you wanna, do you have any thoughts or questions or anything on them?
Not yet. I feel like I'd like to read through them, but I think
Sure,
it's,
sure.
you know, it doesn't surprise me.
Yeah,
If you go to a community that's rich in arts, you want to be there.
yeah, exactly, yeah. So if you wanna just take these things home, or whatever.
Yeah.
You can now and ask questions if you want, but basically, what I discovered is that so percent for art is like the sort of standard. It started in Philadelphia 50 plus years ago. Let's see, let me just pull up, because I have a good document that has my notes on it for this. But basically what they do is they've split it into, no, I'm sorry, this is from a different website, but there are sort of two ways that you can go about it. So there's a public development percent for art, which I proposed briefly to the legislative committee, where basically you allocate a percentage of capital projects that would go to the arts in the city. And so, it's typically 1%. So if we spend $100,000 on a project, which is very low, we would put $1,000 toward funding the Arts Commission. Or not them specifically, but toward public art in the community. There's also something that I found that was very interesting, which is a private development percent for art, in which the city would basically, the developer has to commit a percent for art, 1%, up to 1%. No, that's not right, 1% or more. And then the city would be willing to sort of negotiate additional bonuses. So in, is that in Philadelphia? Yes. Basically the art has to be in a public space, so it has to be viewable by the public, but on the site of a proposed development. And then basically the city will grant either like additional floors or additional square footage over what is codified. Let's see. Yeah, so this says, the bonus for public art is a mechanism to expand and enrich the public's experience and enjoyment of buildings and public space, and to create buildings and public space that is designed and executed with diverse and high quality materials, activities, and furnishings. In order to comply, yada yada, qualifying items, on-site public art, on-site cultural programming. It is not the intention of these requirements to allow decorative, ornamental, or functional elements of the building or public space that are not designed by an artist and created specifically for the site. Commercial activity doesn't qualify. Like I said, it has to be in the building where the public can access, so it's typically on the first floor of the building, equal to at least 1% of hard construction costs. And then they do have something that I think is interesting, that like in order to basically not slow up the process, that the developer can basically say like, it's our intention to do this, and have an agreement with the city. And then they add either bonus floor area or building heights, and they have a table, basically, which I think is pretty cool. So I have all that in order to, like I said, I don't know that this is necessarily the committee for that, but I just wanted to kind of broach the idea of
I mean,
it.
all these committees sometimes like
Structure.
overlap and we,
I know.
you know what I mean? So but I do think that's I think this is great because I could see as you're getting developers coming in, if part of that can go towards creating, enriching like the public art, like especially murals. I was thinking of you because went around the other day and I was walking the dog and was taking pictures of these blank walls.
Big
I was like,
walls.
oh,
Yes.
that would make a great place for a mural, or,
Yay.
um.
Yes, send them.
Foothills.
Foothills,
Foothills,
for sure.
totally, and the inside of the foothills would be so awesome, like when you go in. I guess that's not public facing so much, but
That
like in the
giant
actual
huge
theater, like on those walls,
Yeah, I mean, foothills for sure. When I think about this, the thing that is just like a big, I don't know, in my mind is like the lofts on Deeds, right, which is artist housing and a new development. If we had this in place, that they would need to create art on this artist housing or in it in some way, that would have been really cool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, obviously, we're gonna have the Market Street lot coming available. That would be a great way to get art down there.
And
So,
I mean, eventually in the future, the Ford sales building,
That's what I
right?
mean. Yeah.
Oh, that's what you mean, yeah.
Yep. Yeah, so I think what I would like to do is bring this to the legislative committee, with sort of this proof of economic development reasoning,
Mhm.
and then have them look at public versus private percent for art funding. I mean, we're a small city and we're just getting started, so $100,000 would go a really long way, so. But I think it's really up sort of for them to work it out.
Mhm.
And I can provide them with model statutes, like several, because they're all over the place. So that's kind of my goal. I'd like to hear from Mark, who's thinking really intently about this.
No, I'm anxious, as I'm sure everyone here knows, I'm anxious to see art all over the city. Art is one of the things that's going to bring people into the community. It's also an opportunity for people to document the fact that they visit the city because they take selfies in front of art. I am concerned about throwing up any roadblocks to just to be honest, to our success in bringing in developers.
That's fair.
There are a lot of community
build a new mural that goes up in the city.
Yeah, I love that idea. I mean, I think that was another thing that I was thinking about in terms of like, how could this be a mechanism, is maybe like a city match. So if we say, you know, on this site, on your proposed project, you know, we'd love to have a mural, first of all, you know, we need, or, you know, maybe that's what's codified, right? Is that it has to include public art and, you know, maybe once we decide what that is, there's some sort of city match, you know, public-private partnerships, right? In order to develop, so it's not solely the developer who's responsible, but we're saying, you know, this is important to the city. You know, we have this in our legislation and, you know, we're here to help you support that. But you need to, like you said, you need to buy in too.
So just to throw it out there, the new zoning code for downtown has a mechanism. If you want to exceed the building height requirements, for every level of LEED certification you achieve, you can get 1 story of height above the regulated height. So like, let's say in a zone where you can only have a 4-story building, if you do like a LEED silver, you can go 5 stories. So you're basically buying additional height by incorporating LEED certification. And if you go to the top level of LEED, you can build a 7-story building. In a zone, you can only build a 4-story building. So that's back to that like kind of carrot concept of like, you could add zoning bonuses in exchange for doing stuff for us, which is kind of like, there's a lot of ordinances like inclusionary zoning where they're like, if you put in 20% of affordable housing units, you can build 2 additional stories above what the normal zoning would allow. So there's like ways to write that in where it's not, you're not being required,
Yeah, and
but
that's
you're
what
essentially, yeah, that's what you read.
Philadelphia did. There's
Yeah.
like a table for
Yeah.
additional.
So like, those are all things you could just write into the code easily as like a footnote,
Okay.
which is like the LEED thing. It's literally written in as a footnote.
Okay.
Like, hey, by the way, if you do this, you can do this.
Yeah.
Well, that's very cool, that's great.
When you mentioned the city possibly doing a match for, you know, a building going up and the city helps pay for public art, it's on private property, so that may pose some problems. We'd have to make sure we can do something like that. If it's on public property, it's perfectly fine, on such a source.
I like the idea of like having it reside in the, you know, as these private places come in, you know, with that, having that engagement as part of like, I'm putting up this building and I'm contributing back into the community and kind of putting the onus on the new developers and you know, as like an incentive thing too, could be really cool.
Would
That's a good consideration.
that public art have to go through a committee, a review?
Through the commission, yeah.
Yeah,
So, yeah, it would be vetted. Yeah, and they have in here, you know, they have that approval process written in. Yeah, and basically how the developer would, and that's why I say like, there's also the thing where, you know, it doesn't slow them down, like they don't have to wait for the approval of the art before they just have to commit to saying like, yes, this is part of our project and we will follow these steps, basically. But the steps are written in as well. Yeah, but that's a really good consideration, like, can we match funding on private property? I mean, I feel like there has to be a way. Someone who understands it better than I do probably knows.
Well, there's two where, you know, the public-private partnerships can come into play. So for instance, in Cooperstown, where Golden Heart Supplies has been underwriting some of their effort. So I mean, there are opportunities.
Yeah. Greg, you looked like you had something to say a few minutes ago. Do you still wanna?
I was gonna ask Stephen to explain what you already explained about the building height restrictions.
Okay, great. Cool. Okay, well, this has been very productive. Thanks everyone for a great conversation. If there's no additional business or discussion, I'm gonna break here and then we'll be back